You don't have to become the perfect version of yourself and have everything in place to begin moving toward the dreams God has placed in your heart. She called this permission to stop waiting, permission to step into the best that God has for you, permission to step into your purpose from an imperfect place, because really we will never be perfect. When we go to heaven, the Lord is gonna, at that point, all of this is washed away. But until then, we are still humanity. We are still broken. We're going to make mistakes. Hey, I'm Megann Marcellino, and I want to welcome you back to Generations at the Table. Thank you so much for pulling up a seat. I was thinking a few minutes ago about this table. I felt like I was getting sidetracked right from the beginning, but I'm just going to share with you this table. When we purchased it, when we got this home, we needed like a big table, and we only had one child at the time. Now we have three, and it's just like, it's when we host over here, it's like full of people and life, and I love what we absorb. This is actually my dad's seat. This is Rabbi's seat, which I think is kind of special that I get to record from here when we're talking and having these conversations. But I basically wanted to say, when we have this conversation, I feel like I'm inviting you into our home, into one of my most favorite places, which is this table. We sit here and we have meals together. We have holidays together, birthdays, the feasts of the Lord, and we talk about the faithfulness of God and what's going on in our life and what's happening in the, we talk about, we just hosted, a few days ago. And so this table though is about generations at the table, and it's about us gathering to talk about God, to talk about his goodness, to bring our cares and to bring our concerns. And so with that, sometimes that entertainment side of it is like, oh, are you entertaining or are you being hospitable and are you opening your home? And so what I want to talk to you today is something that I've struggled with in that opening of my home is like seeking perfection. Like you want the perfect food, the perfect tablescape, but God is not looking for perfect. He's looking for willing. He's looking for people to say yes. And that's kind of what I want to talk about today, is that I want you to embrace your calling and stop waiting and start living in your purpose. That's what I want for me too. And I think sometimes we wait for perfect. We wait for ideal. We feel a lack in our own life or a void or an inability. And so we just don't start taking those baby steps towards obedience. In the last episode, we talked a lot about what are those baby steps. And so thank you for pulling up a seat today and talking to me about what that is like to not wait for perfect and to kind of get permission to move into what God has for you. Christine Kane said this. I saw this on Instagram a couple weeks ago and it just stuck out to me. She said, "You don't have to become the perfect version of yourself and have everything in place to begin moving toward the dreams God has placed in your heart." She called this permission to stop waiting. Permission to step into the best that God has for you. Permission to step into your purpose from an imperfect place, because really we will never be perfect. When we go to heaven, the Lord is gonna, at that point, all of this is washed away. But until then, we are still humanity. We are still broken. We're going to make mistakes. And I think that God is seeking our willingness. He's seeking our surrender over perfection. You see this even when Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he was praying. He was basically giving the ultimate surrender, not my will, but yours. He was seeking the Father's will. And that's how we are called to live our life. And I think that there's a common misconception that we have to be perfect before God can use us. And that really that's not farther from the truth. We do not have to be perfect. We do have to be willing. And I believe it is best if we are trying to live our life in alignment with spiritual practices, that God is able to use us more fully. But he's not seeking perfection in order to make that happen. And so I was sharing with you about my need to, like, if I'm opening up my home at this very table, am I trying to entertain, or am I trying to just be hospitable? Am I trying to give a space and a place for my kids to interact with their grandparents, for my kids to interact with, who we call Aunt Sandy and Uncle Tim or Pastor Tim? Like, I want them to absorb the wisdom from them. I want them to have that experience. And so it's really not about perfection. And Lord knows this house is very rarely ever perfect, but it's about being willing to say, okay, we're going to have Sunday dinner. We're going to have, and on a rare occasion, Shabbat or the Feast of the Lord. And what does that look like? And so don't wait to step out in faith until you are perfectly ready and everything is completely understood, because the enemy will always have little unknowns lurking out there that are basically going to hold you hostage, make you prisoner, make you feel boxed in. And I think that those unknowns often become an excuse for disobedience. I want to talk about David. I thought that this was a really great biblical example of this. David was an ordinary shepherd boy when he was called by God. When God called him out from amongst his brothers to be king. He was not perfect. He was not even ready. He was not fully prepared, but he was willing to say yes. And his yes and his willing surrender is what created a pathway for him to become who God called him to be. It created a pathway for him to walk in his true identity and purpose. But it began with a yes in an imperfect person, in an unprepared. I will take this step. I will take this journey. And so how often do we say, well, I can't because I'm not that? Well, you're right. You're not that yet. But God is getting ready to take you on a path to get you there. I can give you an example for me, even doing this podcast. This was not my idea. It was brought to me by one of our team members. Honestly, Daryl was the one who was like, we want you to do this. And it was not my idea. And I felt very unprepared and not really ready. And like I just didn't want to be part of the noise. I wanted to have something to say to you that mattered. And so it was like a scary yes, but it's been an exercise of faith for me. And I still said yes, even though I didn't feel prepared and I didn't feel qualified and I didn't feel like I was the one for the role. I still felt in my spirit that the Lord was asking me to say yes, even though I couldn't understand it all. When I helped Rabbi with his book, Reclaiming Our Forgotten Heritage, I can't tell you what a journey that was, but I definitely felt unprepared. I didn't feel like I had like the requirements needed. I didn't have the knowledge. I didn't have the experience. And it was one of the most challenging processes that we went through. But it was a yes that we both had to make. And we used a publisher, Thomas Nelson at the time. And I mean, man, they held our feet to the fire. They made it be like, this is going to have to come out perfect. This has to be, they asked like literally over 200 something questions from a theological standpoint. Like, are you sure? And we had to go back and back it up with, this is why we're saying this. And the exercise of it was just, it was really tough. And I felt like I wasn't qualified in the moment. I remember standing in this kitchen in this house when I got a call when we had submitted the first draft, and I thought, oh, this is it. This is going to be great. We did a great job. I felt like so confident in the process. Oh no, they rejected it and they sent it back to us and they said, nope, this is not what we asked for. Try again. And I was just like, I was so devastated. And the achiever in me was like, oh, what a failure. And then I remember standing in the kitchen and them saying to me, well, we thought you could handle this. We thought you said you could do this. And if you knew me and knew my personality, those words still, like, I can still feel that, like, because I felt like such a failure, and failure is just something I really try and avoid. And I was so upset by it. And it was like this crushing thing. I can still feel those words. So we go back to the drawing board. We hire someone to come in and like help us with the process. And then we submit draft 2. And draft 2, they were like, okay, more in the direction. But again, literally, here's over 200 things that we want, questions answered, explained before we fully accept this, outlined. And, we thought for sure that draft 2 was going to come back. They literally said, this will probably have minimal input. Oh no. So it was really the third try that we kind of got it. So what, that's a long story. But my point is that we weren't qualified. I certainly wasn't qualified. We didn't have the experience. We didn't know, but we said yes. And God worked through that to shape us, to shape our character, to shape our experience, to shape our message, and to really help us become who He wanted us to be. And so I want to just encourage you that when you can't see through the dark and you can't see the full path, that doesn't mean that it isn't God's best for you, and that you don't have to necessarily wait for the dark to break. You need to find your flashlight, find your footing, and take one baby step. So here we go. How do we take steps towards surrender? Because that's just kind of a big statement for me to throw out there. Take those baby steps. How do we take those steps towards that? And I think surrender is the first step. In fact, it's like, okay, I'm going to surrender to what you have for me. I'm going to surrender to your will, and I'm going to daily lay down my plans and my vision for life and walk in God's vision. Joyce Meyer says, she talks about this and she says, pray first and then make plans. Don't plan and pray for your plan to work. I'm going to say that again because I thought it was so good. Pray first and then make plans. Don't plan and pray for your plan to work. So I think that that's a key is that we start our day, our life, our projects from a place of prayer. We receive what God has for us, and then we begin to walk it out. And then, of course, we ask him to bless us on our assignment of carrying out what he has for us. So Proverbs 3:5-6 says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all of your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct in your paths. So the steps to becoming to that, to being able to walk in what God has for us, even when we feel imperfect, I really believe it begins with surrender. It's saying, okay, I'll try the podcast. Okay, I'll help with the book. Okay, another point of surrender for me was Matthew, our third born son. Like, we had pretty much decided like we were not going to have like a huge family, and that was going to be, and I just had like this I remember the morning when I was like, I really feel like the Lord has something more for us, and I'm saying no. And I'm not saying that has to be your story, but for me, it was like, I knew that there was something being extended, that I was rejecting God's best. And it was because I was afraid that I couldn't handle it, that I couldn't navigate it, that I couldn't see my way to the end. Say yes to the small things. That's another key to walking out what God has for you. Being faithful in the little things and knowing that God uses them to prepare you for the bigger assignments. I think that's key, is realizing that your little yes, your little steps of obedience prepare you for that big yes. Paul and I have been going through a season of transition this year, and there's been a lot of little yeses that have led to some really big yeses. And I told him the other day, I said, you know what scares me is I said, I feel like this was like one of the first big yeses, but I feel like there's even more coming. And I said, how do we navigate? How do we balance so many big yeses? How do we do this? So Proverbs 21 verse 5 says, the plans of the diligent lead surely to plenty, but those of everyone who is hasty surely to poverty. So there is power in preparation. And how do we prepare ourselves? We prepare ourselves by being obedient to what God says, but then daily saying yes to the Lord and walking out that vision that he has given us. And so those baby steps, they may seem small at the time, like a little bit of savings, like a little bit of getting up a little bit earlier, like a little bit of a healthier diet, whatever it is that God has you for, but they lead you towards that big yes and that big assignment. Luke 16:10 says, he who is faithful in what is least is faithful also in much. So we have to learn to navigate and steward those seasons, those moments, those choices, which maybe seem like the least, to be able to navigate what is most. I'm in a position of leadership in our organization, and in full transparency, when I see someone who can navigate a little bit of responsibility and grow something or take on a leadership role, that encourages me that, hey, maybe this person can do more. Maybe they can step into this role or this capacity. Whereas if you see someone and they're barely able to navigate what they've been given, it's like, okay, great team member maybe, but not great for leadership, not great for growth, not positioning themselves. You're looking for people who take initiative, take ownership, take responsibility, grow in their department. Those are very evident things. Well, do you not think that God does the same with us? He's like, hey, there's one of my kids and they're doing really well with this. I think they can handle a little bit more. And so we have to be faithful and not just wait for these big dreams and aspirations. Be faithful with the little things, the little yeses. I can't remember if it was the Midrash or the Talmud, but I was doing something in Jewish studies, and it was basically emphasizing the importance of learning consistent giving and consistent generosity over one big gift. So it's like the practice of tithing, which we talked about in the last episode. It is better to practice obedience and to basically train our hearts to be generous consistently than to just give one big gift and that be it, that be your one moment. And I'm all for big gifts and sacrificial giving, but you still have to train yourself like an athlete would train. And you do that by being consistently generous, consistently obedient with your finances. Tithing is really a financial baby step towards those gifts that the Lord may ask you to give at the feast or at the end of the year, or, when something happens, it's like where you have an inflow and it's like, this is time for you to give out. Will you practice that, every week, every day, however that works for you in tithing? Okay, the next is to step out in faith. Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So I think that there's levels of faith. For me, up until, a couple years ago, I feel like when I thought about stepping out in faith, the most I could do would be if I could see the way forward, but I didn't know exactly how it was going to go, but I could see the path forward. And I'm like, well, if this works out, then this will happen, and this will happen, and this will get me to what God has. But I kind of need to see step A, step B, step C, all of these little lily pads that lead me to the other side. And then if I can see it, okay, I can do it even though I don't, fully grasp. That was where my level of faith was. And then it feels like a couple years ago, it was like faith became stepping out in the pitch black. I can't see lily pad A, B, or C. I honestly don't even know if they're there, but do I trust you? And it took me being able to walk on those stepping stones towards what God had, those little steps of obedience to even be able to give me that. But this year, it's been like, it's a dark room. I know you want me to get to the other side, but I don't know how. I don't know how I'm going to get there. I don't know who's going to go there with me. I don't know what this means, but I am saying yes because I know that you've asked me to. But those are levels of faith. So Jesus doesn't ask you to step out of the boat like in the storm immediately. He's like, trust me with this and let me show you how faithful I am. Trust me with this and let me show you the goodness. Trust me with your tithe and let me show you that I provide and you do not lack. And so therefore you can trust me with those feast gifts. Therefore you can trust me with sacrificial giving. He is a good, a kind, a generous, and a gentle Father. But at some point you have to start taking those bigger faith leaps. And like we've been experiencing, you got to step into the dark room and say, I don't even know if there's another step there, but I'm going to trust your goodness. I'm going to trust your faithfulness. I'm going to trust that I'm living in alignment with the word, and I'm going to take a step. And guess what? I have yet to step and completely fall. I have faltered. I have tripped, but he has always caught me because God is not looking for perfect. He is looking for willing. And you'll never become perfect or willing if you just stay in the boat and you wait for the boat to get to the other side. Jesus is like, come out of the boat, step onto the water with me. I want you to have this experience. I want you to walk on the water across to the other side. And you know why? Because God cares about you and he cares about your character. And one of the things I've been learning this year is that God cares more about who I become in the end of my life. When my life is over, when I am no more, the character that I built, my story, my testimony, who I am as a person, more than all these things I've accomplished. And so getting out of the boat is a shaping experience. It is going to mold you and it is going to make you to be more in the image of your Creator. And so we have to have a willingness to live in rhythm and in alignment with his Spirit. And that begins with us saying yes. And so as the fall feast season is coming up, it is going to require some yeses from you. It is going to require some, yes, I'm going to set aside this time and this place, whether I'm going to celebrate corporately, with Kurt Landry Ministries or House of David, whether you're going to celebrate with your family, whatever it is, it's going to require some effort and more than likely a little bit of inconvenience. And then if you're like us, you're going to bring your financial gifts at the fall feast. And that's going to require sacrifice. And that's going to require planning ahead and obedience and maybe a gift that seems like it's in the dark. Leviticus 23, if you look at it in the complete Jewish Bible, 7 times it says the word generations. The New King James Version says 5 times generations. So why do I bring that up? I bring that up because it says that generation after generation may know. That generation after generation may know. So the feasts of the Lord that we're getting ready to go into are a rhythm that God said that I want the generation after generation to know. I want generation after generation to keep this. Well, we are generations at the table and we are keeping that. So I say to you, what makes our generation any different? Are you the generation where it stops? Are you the generation where it continues? Maybe you're the generation where it begins. And that's where I want to challenge you today, that you can be that generation that changes things for your family. You can consider Leviticus 23 a permanent save the date. God has something for you. God has a plan for you. He wants to meet you. He has a moed. He is taking you towards something bigger and better. And you may feel like, I can't embrace my calling. I'm not perfect. I'm not ready to live in this purpose. But God says, say yes in the baby steps. Say yes in your obedience. Say yes to showing up. Maybe this year it's just I'm going to show up for Rosh Hashanah. Maybe you can show up for all three. But I want to encourage you that when you take those baby steps of obedience towards the destiny and the calling that God has for you, that he is not looking for perfect. He is looking for willing. He is looking for those of you that say, I'm just going to show up even though I don't understand. I'm just going to pull up a seat at the table and I'm going to see what this is all about. And I'm telling you, if you will trust him with your time, you can trust him with your heart, and he is going to begin a transformation so that you can truly start living in your purpose, that you can stop waiting and start being who you were truly called to be, that you can have that permission to not be perfect, but that permission to walk in what God has for you. Because God is not looking for perfect. He is looking for willing hearts. Are you that willing heart? I am. The season I am pulling up a seat at the table. I have some things I'm expecting, and there's a lot of unexpected, but I am expecting God to move and transform. And that happens from that place of willingness. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for pulling up a seat at the table. I'll see you again this time next week. Same place, same time.